Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. It's me, MsNoBuntu DIVA, a divinely inspired, vibrantly anointed artist, and it is time for this week's review of Iyanla Fix My Life's episode 7. So season 7, episode 7. It said finale. But when I saw Iyanla on the Wendy Williams show, she mentioned that it seems as if there were two parts to this season. So I think this is the finale before the holiday season, and then after the holiday season there is going to be something else that happens to continue the Iyanla Fix My Life show, and then it'll be the finale. So I'm very tired. I almost didn't do this review. So I think this week I'm probably going to be very brief in this review, and I'm going to move from the assumption that if you are watching here, you've already watched the episode, but you're looking for different insights and thoughts and revelations that other people might have had, like me, on this episode. So that's what I'm going to be sharing about this episode. Obviously, this episode starts with 5 generations. The grandmother Lula, who was a like a lesbian back in the 50s, and was with her partner for like I think 27 years, and then her brother, similar generation, next generation as her, and then there is the mother, the daughter of Lula, who's Yolanda, who's literally at the center of this whole story, and then her children, Justin, Lauren, and KJ. So, but Justin and Lauren are in the same generation, and then KJ is in Generation Z, whereas Lauren and Justin's wife are millennials. So it's 5 generations, and the premise of this episode is that there are 5 generations. There are a number of things that have happened, and each generation perceives and understands them differently and has a different understanding of what actually occurred, and therefore what needed to be done in the moment when those things were happening, based on the generation that they are from. For example, Lula, Yolanda's mother. So Yolanda is the center of the story. So Lula, Yolanda's mom, is saying, she was with this partner, had first had 4 children with an abusive man, and then met this female partner, and then was in a relationship with her, and then in order for them to have a baby for this relationship of theirs, there was a young social worker that liked her, and she invited him for dinner, and they had sex, and then Yolanda came out of that. So Lula's story is that, at the deathbed of her partner, who brought up Yolanda as their own child, at the death of this partner, Nancy, the Justin's wife, Yolanda's son's wife, who was a nurse, was consulted by Lula for advice. Do we let Nancy go on a morphine drip, or do we not let her go on a morphine drip? And the wife, fresh out of school, said, look, if they put her on a morphine drip, she's going under and she's not coming back. So if she's still comfortable, rather keep her off a morphine drip, and as opposed to succumbing to the pressure of the nurse who was in the ward dealing with Nancy at that time, saying, let's just put her on a morphine drip. So Lula says this is where this whole thing began, because Yolanda felt like the son's wife shouldn't have had a say in anything that had to do with Nancy. But she didn't have anything that had to do with Nancy's being on morphine or off morphine. She was consulted by Nancy's partner, Lola, who happens to be Yolanda's mother. So there was this contention where Yolanda's now attacking the daughter-in-law, but she didn't say, this is what I think. She was approached and asked what she thought. And throughout this whole story, it seems like there is this habit of Yolanda kind of attacking everyone, and it comes across that it comes up that she is attacking everyone because she has a lot of unresolved trauma, what she calls her own trauma train. And she came from abusive relationships, different types of abuses or different traumas that she experienced. And as I'm talking about it now, actually, for me, what I take from this episode is that all of these people are collateral damage to Yolanda's unresolved trauma, and she's bleeding all over the place. And so her mother was in a abusive relationship. She ended up in an abusive relationship. Her daughter was in an abusive relationship. So in trying to help her daughter, she was moving from a place of her own pain and bled all over her daughter's situation, abuse situation, and got into that space and said and stated, ultimatums in trying to help her daughter, as opposed to saying, okay, I hope it's not when you're dead by the time you need help, but when you need help and when you need me, let me know when you need me. I'm here, I'm aware what's going on. Instead, she kind of said, well, if you're going to be with him, then we're not in a relationship, which obviously pushed this daughter, Lauren, towards this abusive man, and pushed her to leave and go away for an entire year, and nobody was in contact with this daughter. So you have that, and then you have now the time when Nancy's just died and the family is at the house, and Lauren walks in and greets everybody to, and bring her condolences. And Yolanda saying, what is this bee doing here? Because in Yolanda's mind, Lauren had something to do, was overstepping by giving opinion that was solicited by Lola, Nancy's partner, from the daughter-in-law, as to what do you think I should do. So she says, what is this bee doing here? She walks into, after the death, and this mother-in-law saying, what is this bee doing here? And so Lola calls the uncle, her brother Herbert, to come and kind of tell everybody to go and diffuse the situation. It's literally either hours or days after this death, and they're busy fighting about, well, you shouldn't have had anything to say about what happens to Nancy. And so Herbert goes down there and says, everybody get out here. Lula's saying, you all need to go. She doesn't want any of this mess. She's grieving right now. And then Yolanda gets all up in Herbert's, again, moving from her trauma and thinking that, well, a man is trying to tell me what to do. Moving from her trauma, gets all up in Herbert's face. And Herbert says, allegedly, that he just moved to, Yolanda had her finger in his face, and Herbert just moved, her finger off her face. And now Yolanda overreacted and said that, he assaulted her. Again, moving from, she's probably been in abusive relationships, been in confrontations with men, and they assaulted her. And so she kind of conflated that confrontation with her and her uncle Herbert, and she chalked it down to, this is yet another man assaulting me when I speak up, yet another man telling me what to do, and when I have a different opinion, assaulting me. And I guess if you're looking at it from the lens of Yolanda's moving from her place of trauma in every way that she deals with circumstances, then you understand that she's probably overreacting to every circumstance. She misconstrues what's happening for something else, for abuse, she misconstrues whatever's happening for an affront. She misconstrues whatever's happening as abuse, misconstrues whatever's happening as something that's not what it actually is, and blows everything out of proportion and reacts from a place of trauma because she hasn't dealt with it, she hasn't resolved it, and so everything triggers her to go back into a victimhood where she's fighting against an enemy or an affront of an enemy in order to get her position as well and be heard. So I think that's, for me, the major thing that came out of this this story, that of course there's a history, there's a pattern in this family of children not knowing who their fathers are, having no fathers. Like, it's 5 generations. There's KJ, the youngest, there is Lauren, there is Justin. These are the 3 siblings, and none of them know who their father is, and their mother didn't know who her father was because there was this arrangement with Lula and the social worker. And so again, everything starts from the head. Once a parent begins to do something and then pretend and doesn't talk about it openly and pretends like it's not there, because it's not been talked about, because it's not been resolved, because it's not been authentically and truthfully discussed, it shows up. Because again, the truth is always this thing that's trying to resolve a silence about something or a lie about something. And if that silence about something and a lie about something has not been resolved, a pattern is going to keep coming again from generation to generation until there is an unsilencing in talking about something, or there is a reversal of a lie that was put out there and it's eventually talked about. The other thing that came up for me is, so that pattern can only be broken when there's a conversation about how you came about, and so this was normalized, that you came about and nobody knew who your father, you didn't know who your father was, and that was never discussed. And so it opened this doorway, it opened this portal for, okay, we can have children in this family and nobody knows who the father is, and no one is asking and no one is bothered. And I think the other thing that really bothered me about this story is, even though Herbert didn't mind it, is how, yes, there were all these children that had no fathers, and now these uncles, and Iyanla called him Uncle Daddy. These uncles have to step in as these fatherless children's surrogate fathers, or take on these children as their own surrogates. And that really bothered me about this story, that, you know, as a sister or even as a brother, you go out there and you have children and you don't make sure that these children are being had within contexts that are functional, contexts in marriage, or, you know, contexts that are well set up to remain after the children are born. And then when these children are born, these structures that are not well set up before these children are brought into this world, they crumble. And then people like uncles have to step in as daddies, or people like aunts have to step in as surrogate mothers. And again, if that is not talked about, and that is not broken, and that is not normalized, then it continues from generation to generation and just becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, until somebody says, wait a minute, we need to stop having children and not having fathers for them, or having children and not having present mothers for them. The other thing that came up was that Yolanda abandoned Yolanda abandoned her children for about 15 years and went to New York City and left with a man who was abusive to her. So when Yolanda was leaving to go to New York with this abusive man of hers and left Jordan for 15 years, the ultimatum that happened between Yolanda and Jordan was, it's either you choose him or you choose me, your son. And Yolanda chose her abusive man and left and went to New York, and had KJ back in New York, because although there's Lauren and Justin, seems like KJ is so much more younger than them. He's in his teens, like 16, 15, 16, and they're like late 20s. So this is a child that she had while she was away. So this child knows Yolanda, grew up with Yolanda, but as for Lauren and Jordan, they didn't really grow up with Yolanda, because she left them for 15 years and went to New York to be with an abusive man, chose the man when she was given an ultimatum. And so Yolanda is angry at Jordan for not giving her sister that ultimatum the second time around. The story with this is that the first time around with an abusive man, Lauren, Jordan's sister, Yolanda's daughter, was with an abusive man. The first time they gave her an ultimatum, Yolanda said, if you're going to be with a man that is, abusive to you, we can be in relationship. And Jordan is saying, yo, if it's either you choose him or you with us. And Lauren left with this man for an entire year, no number, no contact for an entire year. They didn't know. So Jordan, when now Lauren came back from this abusive relationship, he says, what I learned from my experience first with my mother, Yolanda, and subsequently with Lauren is that when you give an ultimatum to a woman, it's either me or your abusive man. They choose their abusive man and they leave you for a long time without contact. So his logic as this generation, as a millennial, was, okay, I'm going to hang out with Lauren, my sister, and her abusive man, and keep them close to me, and go on dates with her and this man, and go on whatever, play basketball with this man around, so that should I see any kind of abuse that goes on, then it's not an alleged situation that he abused her. I saw it myself, and there's going to be a problem. So for him, it was a way of, let me keep them close to me so that I can see with my own eyes the abuse. And then when that occurs, then I step to the man. Instead of just giving my sister an ultimatum. And she tells me, oh, you don't understand what's really going on. Then she can't even have that excuse. That's Jordan's logic, that if I keep the abuser and my sister close, then I can keep an eye on him. And therefore I can keep an eye on my sister, and I can still have my sister around, and I don't lose my sister for a year like I lost my sister before, or like I lost my mother for 15 years when that ultimatum happened. But it's interesting, the hypocrisy of Yolanda to then say, I don't want to be around people who are with abusive men, or who are in abuse situations, or who's, but she was in an abusive situation and even abandoned her kids for 15 years. It's very interesting. Yes, obviously she's changed and she has a different life view now, but to not be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes that she's also filled for many years, to the point where she abandoned her children for 15 years, is strange to me. And again, I think it's probably indicative of the fact that the trauma and the shame of leaving her children for 15 years for a man who was beating her up is still something that she has not admitted to, and she has not consolidated and worked through and processed in her mind, and come to the real raw truth about what she did, and confessed it to her children, and ask forgiveness from her children. So because Yolanda is this way, it makes her a very volatile person, because she's this kind of person that's bleeding all over the place, because she's looking at every circumstance and every conflation that occurs through the lens of her trauma and unresolved traumas. She reacts. When you react, it's either fight or flight. She reacts with fight, because she has not resolved the traumas of her past. And so she brings to whatever conflict or conflation that happens such a magnified and overreaction, and then a misassessment of what is actually going on, because she's moving from, you will never hit me again, you will never abuse me again, you will never again, you will, and so that makes her approach problematic, and it makes her a problematic chain in the chain of generations that are reflected in this entire story, which is 5 generations. And that's what KJ says. He says You know, if I were to say anything to my mother, I would say put yourself in other people's shoes when you are, for my mother and for all of y'all, but particularly for Yolanda, our mother, is that put yourself in other people's shoes when you are busy making statements like, well, if you choose to be with an abusive man, then we cannot be in relationship, you know. And remember the woman that you were when you were in an abusive relationship and you made the choice to abandon your children. Now do it for other people. Stand in the shoes that they're in and see where they are, that, oh, okay, I was there about 15-20 years ago. I made that move. So how else can I approach this person so that they don't go away? You know, maybe I can just say, what do you need? Or when you need me, let me know. Here's my number any time of the day. This is how you get in contact with me. When it gets too hot in this relationship of yours, let me know. I'll be ready. And how would you like me to help you when you're ready? You tell me what you need from me, but I'm not going to tell you what you need to do, because you're in an abusive relationship, and as long as you stay in it, then you and I cannot be in a relationship. Girl, you left your children for 15 years. Whoa. I think the other thing that happened for me that was very interesting was, you know, Lauren kind of having a problem with Justin, not because these children, Lauren, KJ, Justin is the oldest, Lauren's middle, and KJ is the youngest. These children are literally afraid of their mother, because obviously if you're reacting from your trauma all the time, you become this unpredictable character who's always going to be in fight mode, right? So that makes people afraid of you. And somewhere there, you know, Yolanda says, I wanted them to be afraid. But you can see that she's saying, I wanted my abusers to be afraid of me. But then she took all of that and she bled it all over her children, and she instead made her children afraid of her instead of her abusers afraid of her. All of them, because they're afraid of their mother, then they don't feel safe with their mother. There's a lot of noise in the background. I'm in the middle of the city, y'all. So there's a lot of noise in the background, so please excuse that and please be patient with that. So all of her children don't trust her. And also, all of her children don't feel like their heart is safe with her. Should they open their heart, should they be vulnerable to Yolanda, they don't believe that that vulnerability would be honored, and that she would tread light and with sensitivity around them opening up and giving their hearts to her and being vulnerable and opening up and having honest, like, deep conversations with her. So none of her children trust her. And particularly Justin, because I think he had it the worst, because you know, he's the one who had to literally have a conversation with his mom and say, it's either me or the man that's abusing you. And she said, I'm going with the man. And he walked down the street and went and called his grandmother to say, come fetch me, because my mom is leaving me for this man and they're going to New York. You know, so he's like, oh, I know what it is to be unsafe with my mother, in sharing my heart with my mother. So so Lauren is having this trouble, like, what's going to happen? Am I not going to see my nieces and nephews? Justin's well, Justin only has sons, 3 sons, so my nephews, I want to be able to see my nephews, because I'm like a mother to those children. And Justin's like, no, I'm cool with you. I trust you with my children, but I don't trust our mother with my children. So I don't want my children around my mother. So Iyanla's like, well, then this is about boundaries. Learn a way of communication that clearly sets a boundary, that says, listen, if my children, Justin's children, are with Lauren, it is fine. But if you are going to be coming into contact with our mother in the course of my children being with you, I draw the line. I disallow that. But you, as my sister Lauren, always have access to the children, because you are like a second mother to them. You love them like a second mother, and these children love you as well. So I give you access to the children, but not my mother, because my mother will say things to, our mother will say things to my children that are disparaging of my character to my children. And I know this about my mother, and I don't want that happening. And so I do not So Iyanla says, then set a boundary. Clearly communicate that boundary with anybody that you might leave your children with, your sister or anybody who might want to come into contact with Yolanda while they are with your children. Set the boundary clear that you're okay with having the children with that person, but if they're about to come into contact with Yolanda, your mother, then that's not allowed. It's clear boundary.